don't believe that was a chokehold. You had police officers that needed to bring this person down to the ground to place him under arrest. He decided to struggle and fight instead.
Tonight, the head of New York City's police union makes it clear in a one-on-one exclusive interview with Dominic his police officers were not the ones in the wrong in the death of Eric Garner on Staten Island.
I think it's important that they expedite this because voters in New York certainly need to know whether their governor is a crook.
Well, that didn't take long. Rob Astorino taking aim at Andrew Cuomo, Republican candidate for Albany governorship here, talking tough tonight here about New York Times investigation questioning the governor's ethics. And some shameful statistics. Hundreds of thousands of rape kits sitting unprocessed, gathering dust, all because of a price tag. We'll share one woman's story and hear from a former prosecutor as well. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to in the next 60 minutes. Thank you for joining us this Friday evening, July 25th. And we start this evening in Brooklyn, where today, the family of a man who died after a violent struggle with the NYPD officers, he met with federal prosecutors. Eric Garner's wife and mother were part of that meeting, as was the Reverend Al Sharpton. Garner, as we all know, he died last week after this now infamous video was shot on a Staten Island street. Garner, resisting arrest, according to the police, is ultimately taken down by the cops who allegedly used a chokehold on him to subdue him. Garner, he died en route to the hospital. And our own Dominic, he was there. He spoke to several members of Garner's family, I should say, and he met with the representatives of the U.S. Attorney's Office today. They did. But Dominic also sat down with Pat Lynch, and Mr. Lynch is the president of the PBA, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, the union representing New York City police officers. Dominic, you got two very different perspectives today, and Mr. Lynch hasn't really spoken to anyone until today.
That is indeed the case, Richard. This case, this is what we know, is highly emotional from one extreme to the other. In our next segment, we'll hear exclusively from the family of Eric Garner. They are very angry, but we start tonight with the perspective of law enforcement. What you are about to see is the very first time PBA President Pat Lynch has actually spoken out on this case. Lynch says, while tragic, Mr. Garner would still be here today if he did not resist arrest. And despite the video, Lynch says there was no chokehold. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mr. Lynch.
It's a pleasure, Dominic.
I've been covering you a very long time as president of the PBA. How can you defend this?
First off, no police officer goes to work in the beginning of their tour wanting to or expecting to deal with the death of someone in their custody. It's not what we do. But unfortunately in this business, sometimes these tragic things happen. This is a tragedy for the family. It's a tragedy for the police officers as well that have to live with this tragedy along with that family. These police officers are going out to do a job. And we're hearing now a lot of things, what you shouldn't do, what you can't do. But no one's saying what we should do. What should you do when you have someone that's not complying, that says, I'm not going to be placed under arrest? A police officer does not have the option just to walk away. Nor would the citizens want us to walk away. We were on that corner that day because the merchants and the community complained to the police department, and the police department sends the police officers there to correct that chronic problem. So every time someone says, well, I'm not going, leave me alone, we don't have that option to walk away.
Well, how do you feel in this case the officers should be disciplined?
These police officers were sent there. And all we ever ask with any case is that we get fairness and allow the investigation to move forward. Police officers deserve the benefit of the doubt, and they deserve a fair review just like everyone else. That's all we ask in this case. When we come to the end of that investigation, then there should be a decision if there's discipline or not. From what I see at this point, these police officers went there. I don't believe that was a chokehold. You had police officers that needed to bring this person down to the ground to place him under arrest. He decided to struggle and fight instead. They did what they were trained to do, bring them to the ground, handcuff them. You also watched when he said he could not breathe. They turned him on his side. Textbook of what you should do when somebody says, I can't breathe. So these police officers are doing the best they can. If you also look at the videotape, while folks are taking it and chopping it and doing it frame by frame, when you watch it in real time, we're talking about 8 seconds. I believe after the review, after the results, we should decide what was done right and what was done wrong. But the benefit of the doubt should always go to that police officer.
Okay, but wait a minute, Mr. Lynch. You're saying, as the president of the PBA, and the entire world basically has seen the videotape, you do not believe, for the record, even though the mayor, even though the police commissioner, Bratton, has indicated that it was a chokehold, which is illegal under police department procedures, you believe it was not a chokehold?
I believe it was not a chokehold. I believe they were taking a person down to the ground. When they got them to the ground, there was a struggle to handcuff. The police officers went there and had a discussion with him and said, we're going to be placing you under arrest. We've been here before. We know how this goes, basically. And he chose to say, I'm not going. I'm not going to be placed under arrest. They took out their handcuffs and they immediately went for his hands to put the hands behind their back and place him under arrest. He decided that was not going to happen. The police officer's only option then is to bring him to the ground to place him under arrest.
By grabbing his neck and putting him in a hold?
A large man being brought down to the ground, to the sidewalk, to put the hands behind the back. Unfortunately, tragedies happen. When we use force like that, it's never nice to watch. But unfortunately, we have no other options except to go hands-on when someone says we're not going to be placed under arrest. There's thousands and thousands of interactions with the public every day by New York City police officers. People being placed under arrest comply, put their hands behind their back, be brought to the station house, and then it's in the court's hands. That happens thousands of times every single day.
Mr. Lynch, we do appreciate you making yourself available. That says that you're willing to go fully public on this incident. You're not standing behind a press release. But it appears, based on what I saw, and I'm not an officer, but it appears that none of the officers were in danger. So what's the need for a apparent chokehold?
And again, not a chokehold, but nonetheless, the danger that happens is always potentially there when the police approach someone in criminal activity. We happen to be at court today in a situation where a young police officer goes to take someone off the bus for fare evasion, going on the back door of the bus. That police officer ended up being shot. That perp chose to shoot it out. When he approached that bus, was the police officer in danger? The police officer is in danger when the person says, I will not comply. We have to be careful as police officers. We have a right to protect ourselves. Again, it's a tragedy that it ended this way. But most people put their hands behind their back and then go to the court system and go home at the end of the day.
Mr. Lynch, what if it happened to be a family member? If Mr. Garner was a family member of yours, your son, perhaps your father, maybe your grandson, and his only apparent crime is, this ends today, and you're not going to arrest me. How would you feel if this was your family member?
I would tell a family member, place their hands behind their back, be placed under arrest and comply, and then we'll duke this out in court where we're supposed to. That's how the system is set. This is not a person that's never been to court before. He was arrested 30 times before. Now, if the City Hall decides that going after these kind of crimes of selling loosies on the street is not a priority, then tell us. We don't go there because we want to. We go there because it's a condition, the public complained, and the City Hall and Police Department sends us there. If they decide it's not a priority, that's fine. On the street, the police officers don't set the priority or the policy.
Him saying, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. That doesn't say to you, you're an expert at policing, that doesn't say to you that the officer should at least give him some breathing room or back up?
If you see in that situation, when it was under control, he was handcuffed, they turned him on his side, and they called for an ambulance to get aid. That's what they're supposed to do, and they did that. Unfortunately, it did end in a tragedy. Again, a tragedy for all.
He's doing his job. I mean,
Yes.
you've seen him cover other controversial incidents in the past here. His job is to take up for the cops. He didn't agree with de Blasio and Bratton when they said it looked like a chokehold. He didn't think that the officers in question, anybody should have been taken and put on desk duty, giving up their badge and their gun. I get it, but I think he's in the minority opinion here in terms of whether or not that was a chokehold and whether or not what Mr. Garner did that day should have resulted in him going home or basically in a casket. So,
well, Richard, he may be in the minority opinion. I agree with you on that. But he may have some validity to his statement when it comes to a courtroom. This is not going to be an easy case if there are criminal charges. A prosecutor, of course it'll be a seasoned prosecutor, is going to have to prove in court that it's actually a chokehold and that you never see both hands completely wrapped by the officer. I'm not a prosecutor. A prosecutor is going to have to sell this to a jury, and that's the key point, probably to a jury. But keep in mind, even if the officers are cleared criminally, if they are indeed charged, the feds are looking at this case closely.
And we're going to actually have a prosecutor with us shortly to give us his perspective on this. But we're not done yet with this. I mean, obviously some powerful stuff we just heard from Mr. Lynch. We really haven't heard the police perspective until that interview. But you also spoke to people very close, obviously, to Mr. Garner, in fact, his direct relatives.
Well, we're going to hear from heartbroken members of Eric Garner's family about his death and what they think should happen in this case. That is coming up momentarily. And I will also tell you what the Garner family is doing tomorrow and what may actually be much different than anything we've ever seen in a police brutality case in New York City to date. This family has strong praise for the mayor, and that is, in this case, Mayor Bill de Blasio.
All right, we're going to hear that coming up. And also coming up this hour, we will get into Governor Cuomo's Moreland Commission scandal. Hear some very strong comments today by the man who wants the governor's job. We'll hear what Astorino had to say. And we'll also talk live here with a local assembly member about what actually went on with Moreland. She was in Albany when this all went down here and where she thinks this story goes from here.